prevalent and accessible symbolism you see in Catholicism. And even within the Latter-day Saint religion, we have a lot of symbolism, but oftentimes it's shrouded, it's buried, it's not discussed a lot, because a lot of it's related to the temple. And so just kind of this weird tension between symbolism and Latter-day Saint and like just general culture. And so when I see things that originally had symbolism that have been removed from that symbolism, it always makes me sad because it's lost its meaning, it's lost its core. And that's what the Christmas season often feels like to me. I've never been one that liked glitter. I wasn't the girl that liked pink or glitter. The only exception is like gold. I love gold. I like gold, but probably said that for my work. And so when Christmas comes around and there's just like glitter and cheap decorations and it's all fluffy and nobody knows like what the meaning of the symbols are anymore, it's just sad because there's so much richness to be had there. Whether you're coming at it from a Judeo-Christian perspective or even from like a pagan perspective, and like a lot of the symbols that have been adopted from like winter solstice celebrations and things like that. You ask the average American and they just don't know what it is. They're like, oh, we put up a Christmas tree, and like maybe some of them are like, well, it represents Christ. We're like, why does it represent Christ? Or like, what are the pagan roots of the Christmas tree and all those things? And the average person just doesn't know that. And I think that's a loss in our culture. And if we don't find ways to perpetuate that and reinvent that, then it just disappears. And that, in my mind, is the purpose of arts, is to perpetuate culture and to educate people and to connect people with the ideas and the meanings that we find common. And that's something we need more of in this day and age, that people are really good at finding things that we don't have in common, or things that we have different that they don't like, rather than celebrating differences and finding things that we have in common across those differences. So I wanted to open the time up and just have each of you go around and very briefly say a little bit about your background as an artist, and your initial thoughts when I gave you the prompt. And then we'll kind of come back around and dig into your processes, but just like, what was your initial thought process when I reached out with this prompt to you? Emily, number one.
So my name's Emily Larson, and I'm a collage artist. And I think I was just interested and intrigued by the idea of doing something that, and then you might talk about challenging the consumerism of Christmas and maybe making handmade things and decorations and things that would be more accessible to more people. And so I thought about it that way, and kind of what brought me the most joy. And a lot of my work has humor to it, so that was something funny, I guess, was my thought process.
Yeah.
I'm Julian Lake-Diaz, and I work mostly in oil painting, and some of the thoughts that I had, like that was actually something I really had to dig deep for, as you know, and it was kind of a challenging, I loved the challenge that you put out there, because it made me go back and think I also come from my mother's side, a lot of my dad's side too, but like background, because of economic restraints, the consumerism just wasn't even, for them. So I was talking to my mom about what a lot of their Christmas celebrations centered around, and it was getting the family together, midnight mass, and that was always a constant for them. And it's married perfectly, because a lot of their story, and a lot of there's a beautiful song called La Virgen de María, it's that my mom sang in school, and it's a very popular song. But anyway, it's Mary watches Tigers is what it translates to be. The very maternal, loving, caring, and she keeps them in the wardrobe. And it's kind of a sweet narrative of Mary taking care of Jesus and their role and speaking. So that's kind of
well done. I was just watching The Chosen this last week. I put off watching that for ages, because growing up in like the LDS church and all of like the cheesy like 90s seminary videos, and then I went to a Baptist school for graduate school, and so I just saw so much bad Christian cinema. Just like quiche Christian cinema. I was like, there's no way somebody has finally made non-quiche Christian cinema. And so when I finally sat down and watched it, I was like, oh my gosh, they somehow did it. But there's this really great scene, it's I think the beginning of season 2, where Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the apostles are sitting around, and they ask her, like, what was it like to give birth to Jesus? And she starts talking about, first having given birth to him and like holding him as like a bloody baby and recognizing that he needed her and that like the Savior of the world needed her. And it's like, I've never thought about it that way. And this art form is presenting these ideas that are so central and really bring to light the role of women and Mary in this story that oftentimes gets hushed or get glossed over. And that's what I love about your pieces, is that you really just dove into that and the visceral, physical elements of the nativity story and sacralizing those things. And I really enjoyed that with your pieces. Yeah, right.
I'm Mark Bigelow, and I mostly work in stained glass. So my work is sort of divided into two pieces. The ornaments are fairly just kind of pretty ornaments, I think. Though I hope that they're sort of like nice enough to be sort of something that can be
An heirloom.
An heirloom kind of thing. Yeah, so there's that. But the other one, the larger piece, Lo How the Rose Ere Blooming. It's a play on several levels on the rose. For a long time, I've had thoughts about making a rose window, which is a typical in a cathedral. And so I was thinking about that and playing with sort of traditional shape and so forth. And then I don't remember exactly whether I was singing in my church choir or it was just Christmas time. And I thought, what about the Macintosh rose as another layer of symbolism, to use that as a design motif for it. So then I started playing with that, and then also picked up on this idea of Mary as the rose. And so there's multiple layers of that build into that piece. So.
I'm Emily Buck Lewis, and I'm also primarily an oil painter. So when you first sent the email, I was like excited about it because I always love thinking about the Christmas story. But like Julianne has also like had to struggle a little bit with it. Growing up, my parents never introduced Santa Claus to us.
Wow.
Yeah, they. So we were kind of separated from that consumerist aspect of Christmas. Although, I mean,
friends and
obviously,
classmates.
right? Obviously, we knew who Santa Claus was, and we culturally, like, you just can't avoid it. But in the home, we never got gifts from Santa Claus. We knew that it was a myth. We knew that it was just like a story, But, and for us, Christmas was always really centered on Christ. So when I was thinking about this, when I had my first child, all I could think about was, what was Mary's experience like? Like, what was it like to birth the Son of God and the Savior of the world, and to like birth him and to change his diaper, and to, like just all of those very physical things that a mother does. And so I really wanted to explore that more in the paintings that I did. And so I was thinking about, Mary and meeting Elizabeth, and Mary laboring, and who did she labor with, and were there any other female supporters, because in the scriptures, or at least traditionally, shepherds are male, Joseph was her only support person, the wise men are male. So I feel like that's probably not true. I feel like there were probably women with the shepherds. She probably had a midwife. They probably went to a relative's home rather than the inn that we all kind of grew up knowing about. And so there were probably these like aunties who wanted to help her birth and were there to support her. And that's what I was just
I just watched a really interesting Dan McClellan video this week talking about the inconsistencies behind the whole like journey to Bethlehem narrative between the different gospels. And I never put two and two together. And he's basically the argument he was making from like an academic standpoint is that the whole traveling to be taxed has absolutely no historical basis. So, they're not sure exactly how it got written that way or why it was written that way, or maybe they were traveling for a different purpose and that the purpose got assigned. And so, how much of this story have we just kind of accepted one very specific view of it without looking at the bigger cultural and historical perspective? And I think some people, they're hesitant to question the context of the story because then they feel like they're questioning the meaning of the story. And I don't think that's true. I think you can really reinsert that culture in that context, but still really focus in the doctrine that's being shared in that story.
And I also think if you push further, you can get some really, really rich meaning from, well, what does it mean that Mary had to go through labor and that she had to, that it was a sacrifice for her to bring forth this child? And what does it mean that it's basically your body, when you're growing a child, becomes a temple, right? Like that's the origin of life for this being. And
Well, even like the social stigma that she became pregnant out of wedlock. Like, what were the rumors swirling around at her? What do you say about her and like Joseph, or who else? Might be the baby daddy and all of these things. Like that kind of been an easy narrative to live around in that day and age. A lot of layers there. Tyrone.
My name is Tyrone Whitehorse. I'm a Navajo. So when you gave me this prompt, I had to dig deep because Christmas isn't traditionally part of our culture. It's something that was introduced to us. So when I was going through, I had all these things going in my head. My dad's side of the family are practicing traditional Native American religion. So I spent a lot of time, yet nonetheless, it's still respect and honor Christmas. So growing up, I spent a lot of time in between there and my mom's side. My grandmother was one of the first members of the placement program for the church. So I grew up a member of the church, but also growing up with 2 feet in different places. So when I was thinking about the prompt, I was thinking, because it wasn't something that was traditionally ours or traditionally part, there are still aspects of things that happen at Christmas that honor the divinity that is in Christmas itself. Right now, among the Navajo people, there are ceremonies that are happening right now that honor the promises that were made to us, the promises from the Creator that are being renewed again right now. So, those things are happening. So when I was thinking of this, one of the things I wanted to do is represent Mary and the Savior from my perspective, from a Native American, from a Navajo perspective. I only speak for my people. There's over 500 tribes in the United States, and I only come from one of them. So coming from my point of view, I've always wanted to depict the traditional masters how they depicted the Madonna child. Go back into the classical Renaissance era, and there's so many paintings of that. So I wanted to do something similar, and so I painted mine of Mary and Jesus from a Navajo perspective. So she's dressed traditionally, she's Navajo, in her traditional garb, with the symbolism that goes behind it. They're both wrapped in what's called a chief's blanket, which is reserved only for the head men of the tribe, the head women of the tribe. The Savior himself being that, Mary herself also being that. She's wearing her turquoise, which is a representation of the promises that were made to the Navajo people, and how the Creator will remember us, and how the Creator does remember us when He returns again. Her hair is tied up in a traditional way to honor the thoughts and very qualities who surround her. And then they have the symbol of what's going on right now, which is sand painting season, which is a painting in the traditional Hogan of sand on the ground. Surround them, the symbol of our Heavenly Father and our Heavenly Mother together, giving both of them the blessing. So, I wanted to do something similar. So that was my thought when you gave me that prompt.
People responded really well to that piece, very emotional responses to it, to kind of see from our side of the gallery.
I really love when people take the Christmas story and make it their own. Right, it seems like right now in sort of the broader American, probably larger context, sometimes people get grief about doing that, right? Making Jesus, non-white or something, right? But the whole history of art, Jesus has been incorporated into all
Whatever.
sorts of,
Yeah.
You go back and you look at, the Middle Ages and people are dressed in armor and, and it's like, I don't think that's quite right?
Yeah.
So I love that we're just expanding it.
Yeah.
It's a long tradition of taking that Christian story and making it our own, whatever our culture is, and seeing Christ as one of us,
Yeah.
right? Not just us sort of looking at him, but making him one of us. And I think that's a really great thing
Yeah.
that's happening today.
Well, there's this interesting tension too, specifically between Christian tradition and indigenous peoples, where oftentimes Christianity was the source of the genocide and the source of the erasure of culture. But then at the same time, because it's been part of the culture for such a long time, there are many indigenous people that are very faithful Christians. And so how do you navigate that? And like I've seen that with my own family, like the Philippines, and obviously it's farther back than a lot of native populations are, but just seeing how my family was affected by Spanish Catholic conquerors, and how like parts of my indigenous culture have been erased because of that. But then how all of my aunts and uncles and great grandparents were very faithful Catholics and absolutely loved that tradition and loved that church, and so you can't separate the two. And so there's just this tension. And so then how do you reinvent it, basically? How do you turn this back around and in some ways reclaim this narrative if it's something you decided to stick with, being indigenous and believing in Christian principles and traditions?
For myself, I often come back to the answer comes in the fact that the teachings of the Savior himself, which inherently are teachings that transcend all cultures. When it comes down to what happened to Native and Indigenous people here on this continent, I often remember and think to myself that what those who perpetuated those atrocities were not living Christian principles, even though they were doing what they thought was their right, given their Christian right to do. It was still not in accordance with what the Savior himself taught. And so when I come back, it's kind of destructing all of that, or deconstructing all of that, and then reconstructing again within myself the teachings of the Savior himself, bringing that forward. Within Navajo culture and teachings anyway, there are teachings and cultures that just coincide, and that's so wrong with the gospel. With not just Christian gospel, with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the church of Jesus Christ, and other saints, that for me does nothing more than reinforce the fact that our people had these teachings long ago. And when I was, like I said, I grew up with my feet in both worlds. And when I would speak to old medicine men and tell them these things, they would tell me the same stories I hear from the Book of Mormon. They would tell me these things, and they would tell me and recount the visit of what in our language he's the speaker of peace, of the visit of the speaker of peace to our people anciently, and how he chose 12 people here, and things like that aren't spoken of, that are only spoken of in those holy settings there, among our people. That all that did was be able to help me reconstruct the teachings of Christ in a way that conforms to my traditional teaching of me, that allows me to reconcile both what has happened, what can happen, and what is going to continue to happen in life.
Yeah, I love that. I saw a lot of that growing up in Polynesia. There's so many stories, from elders in the community, first contact, especially with the Latter-day Saint Church, and local elders having visions of the missionaries coming. And there's a lot of complex political, relationships there. But it's growing up, hearing those stories and seeing the similarities in the local indigenous legends and in the church that I've been raised in. It was always fascinating. Yeah, again, look for those big overarching themes and the things that connect religious belief across religions and across cultures, and what is it that drives us to become better people and drives us to become better communities, and what are those core truths in every single story. So let's go back around, and we don't have to go in a specific order, but does anybody want to dive deeper into some of the symbolism, or even just like the concept of creating handcrafted objects? Since that was kind of the other side of this prompt, was so much of what we use to celebrate this season is mass produced, and it's not produced with spirit. In the culture I was raised in, there's very much this strong idea that objects have spiritual power and spiritual presence. And I think that's something that within Latter-day Saint tradition, like, we have kind of an awkward relationship with the concept. Like, we do really good with the concept of like a specific space, like the temple or the church having spiritual presence and spiritual power. But the idea that an object can have spiritual presence and spiritual power gives way too much like pagan theology for us. Even though like there's precedent for it in our tradition, and it's not, I think, outside of our theology. And there's a lot of sort of like folk tradition in the concept of like passing down quilts and the idea that like our ancestors are with us as we celebrate reading family history and all these things. And so kind of breaking down some of those, in many ways, Protestant cultural ideas around the meaning and power of thoughtfully crafted hand-made objects. So kind of big ideas there, just throwing it to the ground.
I love that idea. I love that concept because, like, with in creating and thinking about, for example, when I started painting these vignettes, I was thinking first, how are the models going to represent ethnically or more geographically this Mary? Because we have a Eurocentric, Marys and Jesuses. Is that correct? Over the years, it represented an art of my great masters, but to try to represent what does Mary look like to this part of the world, like geographically, and so, sorry, what was your question again, though?
Just like symbolism and the idea of creating a handmade object that has power to it. It's okay.
Yeah, so symbolism is incredibly important to so many cultures, not just Catholics. I also, like you, I look up his trial so much because his connection to, his native to the Tibetan people and how that influences your spirituality. There's a place to house both of those. It's really important to me. It's something I keep aspiring to because it was only a few years ago that I found out that my mother has indigenous. My mother from Chile has a lot of indigenous ancestry, and we don't, because of, like you were saying, those colonizers and conquistadores, that history's been erased. So this unearthing, this project and thinking about this has really forced me to take a hard look at what does the spirituality look like in a visual art form, and what could that look like to other people who have backgrounds like I do, and then to reclaim that into. And so I feel like the imagery does hold that power. The imagery to say that, okay, I'm trying to think about like the models I'm choosing, that they also have mixed indigenous ancestry as well as who is going to represent Mary in this case, and speak hopefully to that fraction of people I can be. And then it does hold a lot of spiritual power, I think, because then we see ourselves reflected in that somehow. Many people will see that reflected in like your work. You speak to so many people who have both feet and both worlds. At least to me, that's what I see when I look at your work. That is very, very spiritual and moving and can, shed a light and shed a light to intrinsically who we are. That's what I thought.
I'll talk a little bit about my pieces. So I did two original pieces for the show, and they're both reads. I've always been fascinated with the concept of like water tunnel round and like the symbolism of circles, of like the sacred geometry of that, and the way you see that repeated through various cultures. And this idea of like rebirth and renewal, and the idea of like things come around again. There's chances. And it's a theme you see across religions. So again, I think it speaks to these eternal truths that have come down from various needs from different cultures. And I also really like the interplay of Christmas and Easter, because from a Christian perspective, the reason Christmas is meaningful is because of Easter. You can't separate the one from the other. Elder Holland did talk about that a couple comments ago. It was really beautiful. And so I often bring in traditionally Easter symbolism to my Christmas imagery as a reminder of the reason we celebrate the birth is because we also are grateful for the death. That birth and death are completely intertwined to this cycle that is central to our religion. And the whole idea of like you can't have joy without sorrow. Like that's central to this mortal experience. So one of the pieces is a little tiny one. Both of them are made with seashells and like sea-based organic materials. For me, it's something I've been trying to work more into my work because it's very much a part of like my culture growing up on an island, and also like in the Philippines, a lot of the traditional arts are made with natural products such as seashells. And so finding ways to reinvent that culture. And that's something that I've thought a lot about the last couple of years is the concept of traditional cultures and indigenous cultures as living cultures. And being in Virginia, I worked with the local tribe there, the Samoan Nation. I did a mural for them. And it was really fascinating talking to their elders and going to their powwows and seeing how they were practicing their culture. And in part, they lost a lot of their culture due to colonization, and so they had to reinvent it. And seeing the ways they brought in contemporary symbols and contemporary materials, and then use that to make their traditional regalia, to make the decorations and symbolic objects for their spaces, really revitalized my view of what expressing culture through the arts could look like. And so that's something I've been trying to explore more with my work lately. And as far as I use these shells for this product. So the smaller one is kind of a crown of thorns, and then it's got little coral blossoms coming out of it. It's referenced to a scripture in Isaiah that talks about the rod of Jesse blooming. And so it's a prophecy of Christ. And again, this idea of like something that's barren and dry and dying being juxtaposed with something that's new and blooming, that those two come together and are inextricable from each other in Christian theology. And then the other one is a wreath made out of cone shells. So cone shells are poisonous snails, and some of them can be lethal if you get stung by a large enough one, or if you're allergic to them. So growing up near the ocean is something you always learn. You don't stick your hands in cracks. If you see those shells, like don't pick them up. Like it's not a fun day if you get stung by one of them. But the interesting thing is that the chemical compounds in them are also on the cutting edge of pain relief research right now, because it's a neurotoxin, and so they're researching using that as a basis for nerve blockers for chronic pain. And so again, it's kind of this idea of opposites connecting. And so the title of that piece is The Sting of Death. And so the reason that we celebrate Christmas, the reason we put up these wreaths and have these green things, is because the birth of Christmas overcomes the death of Easter. And always drawing those two connections. So those are the supporting pieces.
There's always a powerful connection when there's you can see the artist's hand in something, right? And particularly when you know that artist.
Yeah.
That's an extra layer. That's my wife and I over the years as we've tried to buy art and so forth. There's so much beautiful art out there.
Yeah.
And one of the criteria that we use is, well, do we know this person? Do we have a personal connection? That makes it feel like something that we really want, we really like, and then it becomes something that's just meaningful to us for a long, long time. And it can be sort of traditional art. My son also has a good friend who makes handmade bicycle frames. I mean, and to see those frames, it's a piece of art, it's a piece of work. He created it with his hands. I think so often we think that things that we buy at the store just come out of a factory, that there aren't human beings attached to those things, but there are. Lots and lots of things. So that's really nice to be able to know the people who make the beautiful things that have real connection.
Yeah. I know as an artist, especially if a piece is something that's a little bit more personally meaningful, it always feels like just adopting out a child when I sell it. It's like I want to know it's going to a good home. Or, like I foster dogs. It's kind of like that same, like I spent a lot of time and invested in making sure this thing is good and that it's creating good energy in its space, and I want to make sure it's going to go to a place where that would be perpetuated. And it always surprises me how every single time I have a piece like that, it goes to the right home. And it's like it attracts the right people somehow. And like that energy brings in the people that are looking for that specific idea, concept, or energy in their personal space. The most when I see that connection. Hey, any final thoughts from anyone?
I was just going to add, in when you, as an artist, you put yourself into your work. You put yourself into your work so much so that meaning becomes assigned to it. And so when in a show like this, when you're making handmade pieces, I hope that people understand that you're buying not just that piece, but you're buying a piece of us in a sense. You know, in my Navajo culture, one of the things that we are taught is when we make something, we do put ourselves into it. Traditional Navajo rugs have what's called a spirit line on the top of each rug. One, to represent that we don't create anything perfect, only the Creator does. But two, to let the spirit of that rug and to let our spirit leave when it needs to. And so when we make pieces, whether I'm making a piece of jewelry or painting or something, I always try to intentionally leave some sort of blemish for that very same reason, to honor what I've been taught, but also to do those two purposes, to let someone know that I cannot create anything perfect, only the Creator can, and two, to let my spirit out at the proper time when it's necessary. So, if people understand that and understand that our souls are in these pieces that we created here in this gallery, that when you buy something, you're buying not just something, you're buying a piece of us.
I never have to add any extra blemishes. Mine already.
No, I mean, that's what it is. There's a blemish there.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, I think, from a Latter-day Saint perspective, that idea of we are striving for perfection, that we never achieve perfection, it's important to remind ourselves of that. My students hate me for this, but I almost never give perfect grades in my classes because I always want them to know there's always improvement. Like even in my own work, I'll frequently talk to them about like, hey, I just finished this piece and here's the 3 things I would have changed if I could go back and start it all over. Because if you always keep that mindset of a student in your creative process, you will always grow and you'll always continue to create unique things. And you'll keep that humility and that connection to whatever the spiritual source is that's driving you.
My work in general is a lot about messiness, and all this imperfection is very, very speaks to my work. In this show, I'm not a very religious person. I feel more spiritual than religious, so my work is probably, it's definitely way more secular.
Which is totally fine.
Yeah, but symbols of Christmas. But I like the idea that the Santas that I made kind of silly line drawings with some collage elements and these silly people wearing sweaters, they do represent some of the messiness of life, and especially at the holidays, like we're all aiming, where there's this kind of ideal holiday perfectionism that happens, but there is so much messiness in the holidays with all the families and conflict and just expectations and not living up. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, Megan's not here, but her whole series is about having mental health struggles and how the holidays affect you, and oftentimes you have to lean into like your medication and your therapy routine to get through the stress of family pressures and that perfectionism, especially in an Instagram world with everybody with their perfect trees and their clean houses and their beautifully wrapped presents. Like I don't even have a tree in my house. And really normalizing that. Yeah, that imperfection and that finding solutions to the things that you're personally struggling with, that you're struggling with your family, and not having any shame in that process.
I think that's what I love so much about thinking beyond what the scriptures tell us about the nativity story or the Christmas story, is imagining, what was it like when Jesus was a toddler and, drawing with crayon on the walls or whatever, As a mom, I have kids that draw with crayon on the wall. And so I think that's what I just really love about thinking beyond and thinking about Mary. Like she was a real person, and she had real struggles as a mom raising this person. And life gets messy. And I'm sure it was messy for her. They were refugees.
Yeah.
They had, I can't even imagine what kind of struggles that little family had to go through. But I just really love thinking about how they had a human experience. And in scriptures, we often read the story as a story, that it was perfect, that it was, this polished thing, and we don't think about, well, what happened when Jesus had a dirty diaper and she had to change it, or had a blowout? As a mom now, my kid has a blowout, I have like really convenient wipes to use and like a bath to put him in. It's really convenient, and they were in this not as modern setting. Like I just really love thinking about how human their experience was.
Humanizing theology. Well, do you have any questions for our small but attentive audience?
It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. Like, I just took a look up there, and I just want to say thank you for making this art. It really is from the heart, it's from your souls, and it invites the spirit, and it invites people to look at Christmas, not just in like with the bows and the ribbons and like feedings of Jesus and Maria and all this, but to really sit in their shoes and think about it as if we were really there, like who we are now is sitting with them.
One of my favorite pieces from the show is Elias Needham's nativity scene, where he's done it as this street art diorama, and it's like a homeless couple in downtown Salt Lake, basically. And I think it's so easy for us to look at this story for the glitz and the glam and the pretty sparkly nativity videos we've seen our whole lives, and not be able to translate it to modern day refugees and modern day homeless people and unhoused individuals. And that's the meaning of these stories, and the meaning of the stories we see across religions is how does it affect our behavior towards other human beings. And then the posters that we have by Janet Hansen, I love those, where she's taking these stories, very traditional sort of Catholic-based imagery. I think she comes from an Episcopal background herself, but then superimposing it with these words that make us ask questions about how is it affecting our behavior towards modern day events, like how is it affecting our behavior and our attitudes towards modern day refugees and modern day families that are being separated due to political turmoil and laws and actions and violence in our communities and things like that. Because that's why we tell these stories. We don't tell them to just give warm, pleasant things. We should be telling them to think. And even if you're coming at it from like a secular perspective, like you're saying, like how do we deal with the conflict in our families during this season? Whether you're coming at it from a religious perspective or not, how do we deal with finding unity in our communities through whatever the unifying stories and themes and traditions and symbols that we can use on? Thank you everyone for coming.
Oh, one quick question.
Of course.
So, and I apologize if you guys talked about that and I was late. And I haven't seen all the pieces, so I will do this after. But it's just a very practical question. It's just, as an artist, like, how do you, I guess, just really quickly, like, how do you prepare yourself, like, practically? I know you have to go through whatever your spiritual practice is, your emotional place and all that, but just, like, very practically, how do you prepare yourself, I guess, in your environment and gather your materials to say, this is how I'm going to create this piece of art using this medium, and this is how I'm going to prepare for that. Like, a few tips. From a very practical side.
I love your approach. I just personally, I thought about. I came up with my ideas first, like what were the themes that I wanted to include in the painting, and then I actually got a model to come and model for me while I took some photographs. We talked about like what is it like to go through labor, and how would a midwife be supporting her, like putting pressure on her back, and so those are the practical things that I did. I did sketches off of them, and then photographs and like reference photographs. And obviously I don't paint in a photorealistic way, but I do use those as references to make sure I'm lighting things in a believable manner and that my figures are proportionally accurate and all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I work.
I feel like having a dedicated space to where you do your artwork, whether that's a separate room or a separate corner of your home. Some of us are fortunate enough to have a studio to do things in, but stepping into a place where your creative juices get flowed actually is very helpful when it comes to the process of creating anything, whether that's art or anything else.
I think speaking to that, a space where you can let chaos exist for whatever amount of time
Yes.
you need it to. Because I have yet to meet an artist whose studio is organized 100% of the time. Some of them, like, it's better ratios than others. I think a vast majority of us is just like these piles of stuff, half-finished projects, and different supplies scattered everywhere. And things emerge out of that, and there's a beauty in that, of like the creation. Whether it's creating a child or creating an art piece, or even like the broader concept of like how was the universe created. It comes out of chaos, and seeing that order emerge from the chaos is such a beautiful part of the entire process. And not feeling stressed about the chaos. Like, I've had times in my life where like I didn't have a dedicated space, so it was like I was working on the kitchen table, and my husband or my mom, who was over at the time, was like, "Okay, you need to clean this up now." But I'm like, "But I'm not done like sitting with this chaos. Like I need the chaos to continue to simmer so I can get something good out of it."
Yeah.
But it was time to put it away, and so it killed that vibe that I was really good.
I love that. Thank you.
Finding meaning and sometimes symbolism in little things that kind of help propel like an idea or inspiration. Also help me, like for the piece upstairs. I have the models by an alpaca woven shawl, and alpacas are big in the Andes and Chile and Peru and many times, and also for that photo shoot too, I chose Chilean jewelry. And you may not even, there's like a tiny little hint of one of the pieces at the Springfield Art Museum that's there, but there's silver, Tyrone about it, silver made beads that are traditional from one of the indigenous groups in Chile. And so, I don't know, just like little things that kind of like also bring back memories and heart and kind of thoughts in the right place to help kind of propel that creativity also. The viewer may not see it, but I know it's there.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Thank you for participating all. It's been really lovely. I feel so privileged to be able to curate shows and install shows like this, because I have big ideas sometimes, and I don't always have like the bandwidth or the personal creativity to execute them. And so it's really fun to like put ideas out there and then watch them come trickling back to me, with all of your personal spirits and experiences and views of them, and then watch people come in every day and respond to that and connect with that. And it's what keeps me coming back every single day. So thank you for being part of that.
I'm looking forward now to go see the show.
Yeah.
Conversation,
Yeah.
insight, maybe wise.
Exactly. Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'll get this up on Instagram, so you're welcome to share it with people. And we'll send it out to our email group as well, so more collectors get a chance to see it. Connect that. That's really, people buy stories. They're not buying art, they're buying stories. And so we want to connect them with those stories.
Thank you, Esther.
Well,
Thank you.
so much. Round of applause for all of us.
I know.
I love it.